The Woman They Sold. The auctioneer's voice rang out across Gravel Hollow's dusty main street, but he wasn't selling cattle or land, he was selling a woman. Eliza May Carter stood on the saloon steps, 22 years old, visibly pregnant, and utterly alone, while her own father collected bids like she was livestock. The town that had once whispered behind her back now laughed openly, their cruelty fueled by the summer heat and the spectacle of a fallen woman getting exactly what she deserved. But when a scarred mountain man stepped forward with cold eyes and a fistful of cash, the laughter died, because everyone knew Rowan Blackwood's name, and no one knew if he'd bought himself a wife or just another way to disappear. I'm done. If you want to see how Eliza survives what comes next, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Eliza May Carter's life was sold began like any other day of her quiet destruction. She woke on the thin mattress in the back room of her father's failing general store, her hand instinctively moving to the swell of her belly, now 5 months round and impossible to hide. The baby kicked, a flutter against her palm, and for just a moment she let herself imagine a different world. One where the child growing inside her would be welcomed, where she wouldn't wake each day to the weight of shame pressed into her skin, like the Montana dust that coated everything in Gravel Hollow. But that world didn't exist. Not here, not for her. She dressed slowly, lacing the bodice of her only decent dress, dark blue calico, let out twice now to accommodate her changing body. Her fingers trembled as they always did in the mornings, whether from hunger or fear she could never quite tell. Through the thin wall she heard her father's heavy boots on the floorboards, the clink of a whiskey bottle even though the sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge. Wade Carter had been a hard man before her mother died. After, he'd become something worse, a man who measured his daughter's worth in how much shame she brought him. How many customers stopped coming to his store because they didn't want to be associated with her disgrace. When she emerged into the store's main room, Wade didn't look up from where he sat hunched over the counter, his face already flushed with drink. "Get out," he said flatly. "Got business to conduct. Don't need you skulking around like a ghost." Eliza's throat tightened. "Where should I go?" "Don't care, just be gone." She grabbed her shawl, thin wool, more holes than fabric, and stepped into the June morning. Gravel Hollow was waking reluctantly, the way frontier towns did when there wasn't much to wake up for. Horses shifted in their hitches, a dog barked somewhere behind the blacksmith's forge. The air smelled of wood smoke and manure, and the particular dust that only came from land that refused to be tamed. Eliza kept her head down as she walked, but she felt every pair of eyes that found her. The stares had started months ago when her condition first became visible. Now they were as constant as breathing. She heard the whispers, sometimes not even whispered, that followed her like a shadow. Ruined, shameless. Should have known better than to trust a man like Caleb Harlan. That last one always cut the deepest because it was true. She had trusted him. Caleb, with his easy smile and pressed shirts, the banker's son who'd courted her with wildflowers and promises. He'd made her believe she was special, that he saw past her father's drunkenness and the store's sagging shelves to something valuable underneath. He'd held her hand in the evening shadows behind the church and whispered about a future together. Then she'd told him about the baby. She'd never forget the way his face changed, like a door slamming shut. Within a week, he was engaged to Margaret Pritchard, the mayor's blonde, delicate daughter. Within 2, the whole town knew what Eliza was, and Caleb Harlan publicly declared he'd never touched her, that she was clearly lying to trap a respectable man into marriage. No one questioned his story. Why would they? He was Caleb Harlan. She was Wade Carter's daughter, the girl with dust under her fingernails and patches on her skirts. Eliza found herself at the edge of town without quite meaning to, where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and the land started its slow climb toward the mountains. She sat on a sun-warmed rock and pulled her shawl tighter, even though the day was already heating up. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hand on her belly. "I'm so sorry you're going to be born into this." She didn't know how long she sat there, long enough for the sun to climb higher, long enough for her stomach to cramp with hunger. She'd skipped breakfast, knowing there wasn't much in the larder anyway, long enough to hear the commotion rising from the center of town. At first she ignored it. Gravel Hollow was always finding reasons to gather and gossip. But then she heard her name, carried on someone's voice, distorted by distance but unmistakable. Ice flooded her veins. She stood quickly, her vision swimming for a moment, then started back toward town. Each step felt like walking toward her own execution. By the time she reached Main Street, a crowd had gathered in front of the saloon. Maybe 30 people, more than she'd seen assembled since the 4th of July last year. And there, standing on the saloon's wooden steps, like some grotesque parody of a politician, was her father. "Gentlemen," Wade's voice boomed, lubricated by whiskey and something darker. "And ladies, I suppose. Though this ain't exactly drawing room conversation." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "I got a proposition. A solution to a problem that's been plaguing this town, and plaguing me most of all." Eliza's feet had stopped moving. She stood at the crowd's edge, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Wade gestured broadly, his eyes scanning the crowd but never quite landing on her. "My daughter has made herself a public shame, gotten herself in the family way with no husband, no prospects, and a bastard child on the way. Now, I'm a reasonable man." Someone snorted. Wade's face darkened, but he pushed on. "I'm a reasonable man, and I recognize I can't support her in her mistake on my earnings. Store's barely breaking even as it is, and I'll be damned if I'm going to feed another mouth, especially one that's got no right to my charity." Eliza's vision tunneled. This couldn't be happening. Surely he wouldn't. "So, here's what I'm offering." Wade's smile was ugly, triumphant. "Any man willing to take her off my hands, willing to marry her, bed her, I don't care what you do with her. I'll pay $50 cash money. Consider it a dowry of sorts. You get a woman who can cook and clean well enough, and I get my house back and my reputation out from under this shadow." The crowd erupted. Some shouted in shock, others in laughter. A few women covered their mouths, their eyes wide. But more men than Eliza wanted to count were looking at each other, calculating, considering. "Christ, Wade," someone called out. "You selling your own daughter?" "I'm solving a problem," Wade shot back. "Ain't my fault she made herself unsellable the conventional way. This is practical. This is business." Eliza's legs finally remembered how to move. She pushed through the crowd, people partying around her like she carried disease, until she stood at the base of the saloon steps, looking up at her father. "Pa." Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "Please don't do this." Wade's eyes finally met hers, and there was nothing in them. No love, no regret, not even anger. Just a cold, empty assessment of a problem he wanted gone. "Should have thought about that before you spread your legs for the Harlan boy," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Now get up here and let these men have a proper look at what they're buying." Shame burned through her like fever, but beneath it was something else. Something she'd been too afraid to name until this moment. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage at this man who was supposed to protect her. At this town that was supposed to be a community. At Caleb Harlan, who stood in the crowd with his fiancée on his arm, watching with detached amusement like this was theater. But rage didn't matter when you had no power. So Eliza climbed the steps, each one feeling like a mile, and stood beside her father while the crowd evaluated her like livestock. "She's got good teeth," someone observed. "Childbearing hips, at least," another added. "How far along?" a rough voice called. 5 months, Wade answered. "Baby'll be here by winter. You'll get 2 for the price of 1, eventually." More laughter. Eliza fixed her eyes on the horizon, on the mountains that ringed the valley, and tried to disappear inside herself. "I'll give you $20, someone offered. Eliza didn't look to see who. 25, another countered. 30, but I want it in writing. She's got to work off the cost of feeding that brat." Wade was nodding, clearly pleased with himself, when a new voice cut through the crowd, low, rough, and utterly devoid of humor. $100. The crowd went silent, heads turned. Eliza's eyes followed, and her breath caught. The man who'd spoken stood at the back of the crowd, but people moved aside for him instinctively, creating a path like he was something dangerous that required distance. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders built for hard labor and a frame that suggested both strength and restraint. His hair was dark, long enough to brush his collar, and his face was weathered in a way that made guessing his age impossible. He could have been 30 or 50. But it was his eyes that made Eliza's skin prickle, dark, steady, and completely unreadable. They swept over her once, not leering, not calculating, just observing, and then returned to her father. "That's Rowan Blackwood," someone whispered urgently. "Jesus Christ, that's the mountain man." The name rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Eliza had heard it before. Everyone had. Rowan Blackwood was a legend in Gravel Hollow, but the kind of legend parents use to frighten children. He lived up on Pinegrave Ridge, miles from anyone else. Came into town maybe twice a year to trade furs and buy supplies. There were stories about him, that he'd killed men during the war, that he'd gone mad from what he'd seen, that he preferred the company of wolves to people. Wade's face had gone pale, but greed won out over fear. $100, he repeated. That's a serious offer, Mr. Blackwood." "It is." Rowan started walking forward, and the crowd parted further, people actually stepping back. He moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent years in wild places, someone who understood that sudden movements could mean death. "I'll pay cash, today, but we do this proper." "Proper?" Wade's voice pitched higher. Rowan reached the steps. Up close, Eliza could see the scars, one that ran from his temple into his hairline, another across the back of his left hand. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind of practical durability that came from making things last. He smelled like pine smoke and leather. "A bill of sale," Rowan said quietly. "Signed by you, witnessed by the sheriff, states that Eliza May Carter is released from your household and authority, and that you relinquish all claims to her and any children she bears. Forever." Wade blinked. Marriage would. "I didn't say anything about marriage." Rowan's voice was flat. "I said a bill of sale. You're selling her, so we'll make it legal." Something about the way he said it made Eliza's stomach turn. This was actually happening. She was actually being sold, like a horse or a wagon or a piece of land. Wade looked around, seeing nothing but greedy eyes and curious faces. "Sheriff Moody, you willing to witness?" The sheriff, a pot-bellied man with a star pinned to his vest, stepped forward reluctantly. "This is highly irregular, Wade." "But not illegal," Rowan said. "Man has a right to distribute his property however he sees fit. Isn't that what you told Mrs. Chen when her husband sold her piano?" The sheriff's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll witness it." 20 minutes later, Eliza stood in the sheriff's office while her father signed away every legal right he had to her. Rowan counted out $100 in gold coins, a fortune, enough to keep Wade drunk for years, and accepted a single piece of paper in return. Throughout it all, Eliza said nothing. She felt like she was watching from somewhere outside her body, disconnected from the transaction that was sealing her fate. When it was done, Rowan folded the paper carefully and tucked it inside his jacket. Then, for the first time, he looked directly at her. "Do you have belongings you need to collect?" His voice, addressed to her instead of around her, startled Eliza into speech. Yes. Some clothes, a few things." "Go get them. I'll wait here." She glanced at her father, but Wade was already leaving, the coins clinking in his pocket. Not even a goodbye or a backward glance. Eliza walked back to the store in a daze. Inside, she gathered her pathetic collection of possessions. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, her mother's hairbrush, a small wooden box that contained 3 buttons, and a letter her mother had written her before she died. Everything fit in a single worn carpet bag. When she returned to the sheriff's office, Rowan was waiting outside, standing beside a large black horse that looked as wild and wary as its owner. "That everything?" he asked. Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. Rowan took her bag and secured it behind the horse's saddle with practiced efficiency. Then he turned back to her, and for the first time something that might have been gentleness crossed his face. "I'm going to help you up," he said quietly. "Then I'm mounting behind you. We've got 2 hours' ride to my cabin. You can hold the saddle horn if you want distance between us. Understood?" The specificity of it, the way he was giving her choices even now, made something crack in Eliza's chest. She nodded again. His hands, when they gripped her waist to lift her, were careful, impersonal. He set her on the horse like she was something fragile, then swung up behind her with easy strength. His arms came around her to take the reins, but he kept space between their bodies, exactly as he'd promised. "Go on," he said to the horse, and they started moving. Eliza looked back once as they left Gravel Hollow. The town was already returning to normal, the spectacle over. People were heading back to their shops and homes and ordinary lives, probably already composing the story they'd tell about Wade Carter's daughter and the mountain man who bought her. No one waved goodbye. No one looked concerned. She was simply gone, erased, as if she'd never existed. The ride up to Pinegrave Ridge passed in silence. Rowan didn't speak, and Eliza was too numb to form words. The trail climbed steadily, leaving behind the dusty plains for pine forest, the air growing cooler and cleaner with each mile. Birds called from the trees. A creek ran somewhere nearby, its sound threading through the afternoon. Eliza's mind kept circling back to one terrible question. What now? She knew what happened to women who were bought. She'd heard stories. And Rowan Blackwood, for all his quiet words and careful hands, was still a man who'd paid $100 for her. He'd own her now, in every way that mattered. The baby kicked, as if reminding her she didn't have the luxury of fear. Whatever happened, she had to survive it, for both of them. When the cabin finally came into view, Eliza's breath caught despite herself. It wasn't what she'd expected. The stories about Rowan Blackwood had painted him as half-wild, living in some rough shelter barely better than a cave. But the cabin before her was solid and well-made. Log walls chinked tight against weather. A stone chimney, real glass windows, and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. Beyond it, she could see a small barn, a chicken coop, and what looked like a vegetable garden protected by a sturdy fence. It looked like a home. A real home. Rowan dismounted and held up his arms to help her down. Eliza's legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. 2 hours of riding had left her stiff and aching. She swayed, and his hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy," he said. "You need to sit down?" "I'm fine," she managed, though she wasn't sure if that was true. Rowan studied her for a moment, then nodded. He retrieved her bag and led the way to the cabin's front door, pushing it open and stepping aside to let her enter first. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but as Eliza's eyes adjusted, she saw more surprises. The main room was neat, almost austere, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, shelves lined with preserves and dried goods, and a rocking chair near the hearth. A ladder led to a loft space. Everything was clean, well-maintained, and utterly unexpected. "There's a room back there," Rowan said, pointing to a door she hadn't noticed. "It was supposed to be storage, but I cleared it out this morning. Put in a bed, a washstand. It's small, but it's private." Eliza turned to look at him, confusion overriding fear for a moment. "Private?" Something flickered in Rowan's dark eyes. Pain, maybe, or weariness. "Yeah, private. For you." He crossed to the door and opened it, revealing a small room with a narrow bed, a simple washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. Sunlight came through a single window, illuminating rough wooden walls. Then he did something that made Eliza's heart stutter. He took a key from his pocket and showed it to her. "This locks from the inside. The only key is this one." He held it out to her. "It's yours. You lock that door, no one gets in unless you open it, including me. Especially me." Eliza stared at the key in his calloused palm, her mind struggling to process what he was offering. "I don't," she started, then stopped. "I don't understand." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I know what it looked like down there. I know what you must think. But I'm not going to hurt you, Eliza. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to touch you unless you ask me to, and I don't expect you to ask." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I saw what they were doing to you, saw what your father was doing, and I had money, and I could stop it, so I did. That's all." "That's all?" Eliza's voice came out higher than she meant it to. "You paid $100. I know what I paid." He was still holding out the key. "And maybe I'm a fool. Maybe this was a mistake. But you're here now and you're safe, and that's what matters. Take the key, Eliza. Slowly, hardly believing what she was doing, Eliza reached out and took the key. It was warm from his hand, solid and real. "There's food in the larder," Rowan continued, his voice becoming more businesslike, like he was relieved to move past the awkward moment. "Help yourself to whatever you need. Water from the pump outside is clean. I've got chores to do, checking traps, tending the animals. I'll be back before dark." He hesitated. "If you need anything, ring the bell on the porch. I'll hear it." Then he turned and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Eliza stood frozen in the middle of the small room, the key clutched in her fist, and listened to his footsteps cross the main room, the front door open and close, his voice speaking low to the horse. Then silence. She looked around the room, her room, apparently. The bed had a quilt on it, faded but clean. The pitcher on the washstand was full of water. The window looked out over the forest, pine trees stretching toward the mountains. Carefully, testing whether this was real, Eliza walked to the door. She closed it. The key slid into the lock smoothly, and when she turned it, she heard the bolt slide home with a solid click. Locked. From the inside. Like he'd promised. Something inside her chest. Something that had been wound tight since the moment she realized she was pregnant, maybe even before that, suddenly loosened. Not broke, not released, just loosened. Enough to let her breathe. Eliza sank onto the bed, her bag still in her hand, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry. Not the silent tears she'd learned to hide from her father, but real sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the girl she'd been, the one who'd believed in Caleb Harlan's promises. She cried for the town that had turned its back on her. She cried for her mother, who'd died too young to teach her how to survive this kind of cruelty. And she cried because a strange man with terrible stories attached to his name had just given her something no one else had, a locked door with the key on her side. When the tears finally stopped, Eliza felt hollowed out, but strangely clear. She stood, washed her face in the basin, and unpacked her meager belongings. Her 2 dresses went on pegs on the wall, the hairbrush on the washstand, the wooden box on the trunk. Then she unlocked the door and ventured into the main room. It was exactly as she'd left it, empty, quiet, sunlight slanting through the windows. Outside, she could hear Rowan working somewhere, the sound of an axe splitting wood in a steady rhythm. Eliza walked to the shelves and examined the stores: flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, preserves in neat jars labeled in careful handwriting. More than enough for 2 people, even with her pregnancy appetite. She found herself moving almost without thinking, pulling down ingredients, stoking the fire in the hearth, heating water. By the time the sun was lowering toward the western peaks, she had biscuits baking and beans simmering with salt pork, coffee brewing in a battered pot. She wasn't sure why she was doing it. Gratitude, maybe? Or just the need to do something normal, something that made sense, after a day that had made no sense at all. When Rowan came back, his arms full of firewood, he stopped in the doorway and stared at the table she'd set. 2 plates, 2 cups, forks and knives, the food steaming in the center. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. Eliza stood near the hearth, wiping her hands on a cloth she'd found. "I know. I wanted to." He studied her for a long moment, and she found herself studying him back. In the warm light of the cabin, he looked less frightening than he had in town. Tired, maybe, and carrying old sorrows, but not cruel, not dangerous. "Thank you," he said finally. Then he set down the firewood, washed his hands in a basin by the door, and sat at the table. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the evening sounds of the forest rose. Bird calls, wind in the pines, the distant howl of something wild. Inside, there was just the clink of forks on plates, the crackle of the fire, and 2 people who'd stumbled into something neither of them fully understood yet. When the meal was done, Rowan stood. "I'll clean up. You should rest." "I can rest," he said again, and there was something almost gentle in the command. "You've had a long day, longest you'll ever have, probably." Eliza couldn't argue with that. She retreated to her room, locked the door out of habit more than fear, and lay down on the bed still fully clothed. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Rowan moving quietly in the main room, washing dishes, banking the fire, settling in for the night somewhere out there, close enough to hear if she called, far enough to keep his promise. For the first time in 5 months, Eliza May Carter fell asleep without being afraid of what the morning would bring. And on the other side of the locked door, Rowan Blackwood sat in his rocking chair, staring into the dying fire, and wondered what the hell he'd just done, and whether the woman sleeping in the next room would ever understand that saving her might be the only decent thing he had left to offer the world. The first week passed in a strange, cautious dance of two people learning to exist in the same space without colliding. Eliza woke each morning to find the fire already lit, a pot of coffee warming on the hearth, and Rowan already gone, out checking his trap lines or tending to work that kept him away until late morning. He'd leave things for her, though. Small things. A jar of honey beside her door one morning. A handful of wildflowers in a tin cup the next. Fresh eggs still warm from the henhouse. Never with a note, never with explanation, just quiet offerings that said, "I see you, you're here, this is for you." She'd spend her mornings alone in the cabin, moving slowly through the space like she was learning a new language. The main room became familiar, the way the floorboards creaked near the hearth, the spot where sunlight pooled brightest by midday, the particular smell of pine logs burning mixed with coffee and the leather oil Rowan used on his boots. She'd cook, clean, organize shelves that didn't really need organizing, anything to feel useful, to justify her presence in this place she still didn't quite believe was real. By the third day, she'd started tending the garden. It needed work, weeds creeping between the bean plants, tomatoes growing wild without proper stakes, squash vines sprawling everywhere. She worked carefully, her pregnant belly making it hard to bend, but the act of putting her hands in the soil felt like reclaiming something she'd lost. Her mother had kept a garden. Eliza remembered being small, following her between the rows, learning which plants needed shade and which craved sun. That's where Rowan found her on the fourth afternoon, kneeling between the rows with dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her forehead despite the mountain coolness. "You don't have to do that," he said from the garden gate. Eliza looked up, shading her eyes against the sun behind him. "I know, but it needed doing." He stood there for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed the garden and crouched beside her, his movements economical and careful, like everything else about him. "You're staking them wrong," he said, not unkindly. "Tomatoes need support here or there, like this." His scarred hands moved deftly, showing her how to tie the vine without damaging it. "Oh," Eliza said, feeling foolish. "You couldn't have known. Different altitude, different growing season than down in the valley." He glanced at her. "Your mother teach you to garden?" It was the first personal question he'd asked her. "Yes, before she died." "Mine too." He finished tying off the plant and stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "She said a man who could grow his own food was never truly poor." "What happened to her?" "Fever, long time ago." He said it matter-of-factly, but Eliza heard the old grief underneath. "I'll show you the rest tomorrow if you want. How things grow up here." "I'd like that." He nodded and walked back toward the cabin, leaving Eliza in the garden with a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. That night, for the first time, they spoke during dinner. "How long have you lived up here?" Eliza asked, breaking the silence that had become their routine. Rowan looked up from his plate, surprised. 7 years. Built the cabin the first winter." "Alone?" "Alone." He took a drink of coffee. "Came back from the war and couldn't be around people anymore. Up here made sense. Still does, mostly." Eliza heard the carefully placed word. "Mostly." "What did you do before the war?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Carpentry. Furniture making. My father had a shop in St. Louis. I was supposed to take it over." He paused. "Then Fort Sumter happened, and I enlisted, and when I came back 4 years later, my father was dead, and the shop was sold, and I was—" He trailed off, his eyes distant. "Different. Different how? The kind of different that makes you not fit anywhere civilized." He met her eyes then, and there was something raw in his gaze, something that looked like a warning. "I've done things, Eliza. Bad things. Things that made sense at the time because we were told they were necessary, but afterward," he shook his head. "Afterward, You can't wash them off, can't forget, can't pretend you're the same person who left. Eliza's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The town says you're dangerous. The town's not wrong. His voice was flat, factual. I am dangerous. I know how to kill in ways most men can't imagine. I've got a temper that's taken years to control, and some days I still lose it, usually at trees or rocks, things that can't be hurt. That's why I stay up here. That's why I keep distance. Then why did you come down that day? Why did you buy me? The question hung between them like something physical. Rowan pushed his plate away, his appetite clearly gone. Because I saw what they were doing to you, and it was wrong. Simple as that. He stood, carried his plate to the wash basin. And because maybe I thought if I could do one decent thing, one thing that wasn't about violence or anger or all the darkness I've been carrying, then maybe I deserve to keep living up here, keep existing. Eliza's throat tightened. That's a lot of weight to put on one person. I know. It's not fair to you. He turned to face her. If you want to leave, I'll take you to the next town over, Silver Creek. Give you enough money to start somewhere new, somewhere nobody knows your story. You don't owe me anything, Eliza. That paper I made your father sign, I'll burn it tonight if you want. She should want that, should jump at the chance to escape, to start over somewhere fresh. But as she looked around the cabin, at the comfortable chair by the fire, the locked door that had given her the first real sleep she'd had in months, the garden outside where things were growing under her care, she realized something surprising. She didn't want to leave. No, she said quietly. I'll stay, if that's all right. Rowan's shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing. Yeah, that's all right. The next morning, Eliza woke to voices outside, low, male, and unfamiliar. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight, and peered through the glass. Two men stood near Rowan's woodpile, both armed, both looking around the property with an assessment that made her skin crawl. Rowan stood between them and the cabin, his posture deceptively relaxed but radiating the kind of controlled danger she'd glimpsed that first day in town. Just passing through, Blackwood, one of them was saying. Heard you might have something that belongs to someone else. Nothing here belongs to anyone but me, Rowan's voice carried clearly in the morning air. See, that's interesting. The second man spat tobacco juice into the dirt, because Wade Carter's been drinking heavy and talking loud about how he sold his daughter too cheap. Says maybe he made a mistake. Says maybe the deal wasn't proper legal. The deal was witnessed by the sheriff and signed in ink. It's legal as anything gets. Rowan shifted slightly, his hand nowhere near the rifle propped against the woodpile, but somehow closer than it had been a moment ago. And even if it wasn't, Eliza's here by choice now. Any complaints can go through the territorial court. The first man laughed, but there was no humor in it. Territorial court, that's rich. You really think anyone cares about legal niceties out here? He glanced toward the cabin. Why don't you let us talk to the girl? Make sure she's being treated proper. No. The single word fell like a stone. The two men exchanged glances. That's not very neighborly, Blackwood. We're not neighbors. You're trespassing. I'm giving you one chance to leave before I stop being polite about it. Inside the cabin, Eliza's hands were shaking. She recognized the tone. She'd heard it before, in town, when men decided a woman's choices didn't matter as much as their own convenience or curiosity. But she also heard something else. She heard Rowan, standing between them and her, immovable as the mountains themselves. The standoff lasted another tense minute. Then the first man shrugged. All right, Blackwood, we'll go. But people are talking. Might want to consider that. People always talk, doesn't make them right. The men left, their horses kicking up dust as they rode back down the trail. Rowan didn't move until they were out of sight, and even then he stood there a long time, his back to the cabin, his shoulders rigid. Finally, he turned and saw Eliza in the window. Their eyes met through the glass, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or a shared recognition of the fragility of this strange sanctuary they were building. When he came inside, Eliza was making coffee, her hands steadier than they'd been minutes before. They'll come back, she said. It wasn't a question. Maybe. Probably not those two, but others. Rowan poured himself a cup, his movements controlled. Your father's pride is hurt. Men like him don't let things go easy. I'm sorry. Don't be. He met her eyes over the rim of his cup. I knew what I was buying into. Literally. A ghost of dark humor crossed his face. Besides, I've faced worse than a drunk store owner and his hired mouths. Eliza wanted to ask what could be worse than being hunted by your own father, but she already knew the answer. Whatever Rowan had seen in the war, whatever he'd done, it lived in the shadows behind his eyes. Will you teach me to shoot? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Why? Because I can't hide in this cabin forever. Because if someone comes when you're not here, I need to be able to protect myself. She paused, her hand moving to her belly. Protect us. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, something like respect dawning in his expression. All right. After breakfast. An hour later, they stood in the clearing behind the cabin. Rowan had set up tin cans on a fallen log 50 feet away and handed Eliza a rifle that felt impossibly heavy in her hands. It's going to kick, he said, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not so close that it felt improper. So brace yourself. Plant your feet like this. He demonstrated, and Eliza mimicked his stance. Good. Now bring it to your shoulder, tight. You don't want space for it to build momentum. Cheek to the stock. Look down the barrel. Line up the sights. Eliza did as he instructed, but her arms were already trembling from the weight. Breathe, Rowan said quietly. In and out. Slow. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze, like you're trying to surprise yourself. She breathed, squeezed. The rifle roared and kicked back hard enough to bruise her shoulder. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 10 feet to the left of the cans. Again, Rowan said. You dropped your elbow at the last second. Keep it up. They spent the better part of an hour like that, Rowan correcting her form with patient precision, Eliza learning the weight and feel of the weapon. By the end, she'd managed to hit one can, and the triumph that surged through her was sweeter than anything she'd felt in months. Better, Rowan said, and coming from him, it felt like high praise. Keep practicing. In a few weeks, you'll be able to hit what you're aiming at more often than not. That night, Eliza's shoulder ached and her ears still rang faintly, but she felt different, stronger, like she was learning to take up space in the world again instead of just trying to disappear. The days began to blur into a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy. Rowan would work his trap lines in the land, coming back with rabbit or venison or once, miraculously, a young elk that kept them in meat for weeks. Eliza tended the garden, practiced shooting when Rowan was nearby to supervise, and slowly transformed the cabin from a bachelor's functional space into something that felt lived in. She made curtains from fabric Rowan brought back from a trading post 3 valleys over. She organized his chaotic collection of hand tools. She even convinced him to let her move the furniture around, creating better flow and more light. It looks different, Rowan said one evening, standing in the doorway and surveying the changes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Different bad? Eliza asked, suddenly uncertain. Different like a home. He said it quietly, almost to himself. I'd forgotten what that looked like. They talked more during meals now. Small exchanges at first, comments about the weather, observations about the animals, questions about how to preserve food for winter. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Eliza told him about her mother, the quiet woman who'd taught her to read using an old Bible and whatever newspapers made it to Gravel Hollow. Rowan told her about his childhood in St. Louis, learning his father's trade, the satisfaction of seeing raw wood transform into something beautiful and useful. You could do it again, Eliza said one evening. The furniture making. You have the tools, the skill. Rowan shook his head. Hands aren't steady enough anymore. War shakes got into them. I don't see any shaking. He held up his right hand, and Eliza saw it then, the finest tremor, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Some days worse than others. Can't risk it with fine work. One slip and you ruin hours of carving, waste good wood. What about simple things, things that don't need to be perfect? He considered this. Maybe. Why? Because I've seen the things you make for yourself. That rocking chair, you made that, didn't you? And the shelves, the table. She gestured around the cabin. They're beautiful, Rowan. Simple, but beautiful. People would pay for that. People don't come up here. No, but you go down to trade. You could bring furniture instead of just furs. Something flickered in his eyes, interest maybe, or the ghost of an old dream. I'll think about it. 2 days later, Eliza woke to the sound of sawing. She dressed quickly and found Rowan in the barn, a piece of pine laid across his workbench, his hands moving with careful precision as he shaped it with a draw knife. "What are you making?" she asked from the doorway. He didn't look up, but she saw his mouth quirk. "Cradle. Baby's gonna need somewhere to sleep." Eliza's breath caught. The baby. In all the strangeness of the past weeks, she'd almost forgotten that come winter, everything would change again. Her hand moved to her belly, where the child was growing bigger each day, movement stronger and more frequent. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." He ran his hand along the wood, checking for smoothness. "I want to." Over the following days, the cradle took shape. Rowan worked on it in the evenings, after his other chores were done, his hands sure despite the tremor he'd shown her. Eliza would sit in the rocking chair and watch, mending or knitting small things from yarn Rowan had traded for, and they'd talk. Real talk, the kind that revealed the people underneath their careful exteriors. "Why did you really buy me?" Eliza asked one night. The question had been circling her mind for weeks. "The truth, Rowan. Not the noble reason. The real one." His hand stilled on the wood. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his tools and looked at her directly. "Because I was in town that day to buy rope," he said quietly. "Good rope, the kind you can hang weight from without it fraying. And I was standing in the general store, your father's store, trying to decide if I wanted enough rope to hang myself or if I was going to give living another season." Eliza's heart clenched. "Then I heard the commotion outside," Rowan continued. "Heard your father's voice, heard what he was doing, saw you standing there, and I saw—" He paused, his jaw working. "I saw someone else who'd reached the end of what they could survive alone. And I thought, maybe if I could help you, give you a chance at something different, then maybe I wouldn't need that rope after all. Maybe there was still something worth staying alive for, even if it was just making sure one person didn't get destroyed by the cruelty of small men." Tears burned in Eliza's eyes. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "Maybe, but it's the truth." He picked up his tools again. "You asked." "I did." She wiped her eyes. "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for asking." He returned to his work, and Eliza returned to her knitting, and the evening passed in companionable silence, broken only by the rasp of tools on wood and the crackle of the fire. The cradle was finished on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after Eliza had first arrived at the cabin. Rowan carried it into her room and set it near the window, where morning light would warm it. It was simple but exquisite. Smooth pine with carved hearts on the headboard, rockers that moved with barely a touch, sturdy enough to last generations. Eliza ran her fingers over the carving, her throat too tight for words. "If you don't like it," Rowan started. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's the most perfect thing anyone's ever made for me." He shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise. "Baby deserves something solid, something that won't break." "So do I," Eliza said, and she wasn't talking about the cradle anymore. Rowan's eyes met hers, dark and intense. "Yeah, you do." Something shifted between them in that moment, subtle as seasons changing, but just as inevitable. Eliza felt it in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the quiet, steady man who'd given her safety when she'd had nothing, who'd kept his promises when every other man had broken theirs. But before she could name the feeling, before she could decide what to do with it, the sound of horses carried up from the trail below. Multiple horses, moving fast. Rowan heard it the same moment she did. His expression shuddered immediately, all the softness vanishing behind the wall he kept between himself and danger. "Get inside," he said. "Lock your door. Don't come out unless I call you." "Rowan, now, Eliza." She fled to her room, her heart hammering. Through the window, she watched Rowan stride out to meet whoever was coming, his rifle in his hands, his whole body radiating lethal purpose. When the riders came into view, Eliza's blood turned to ice. Leading them, looking older and meaner than she remembered, was her father. Behind him rode Sheriff Moody and 4 other men she recognized from Gravel Hollow. And bringing up the rear, sitting his horse like he owned the world, was Caleb Harlan. "Blackwood," Wade's voice was slurred with drink even at mid-morning. "You got something that belongs to me, and I'm here to take it back." Rowan stood in the yard, utterly still. "You signed a paper, Wade. Witnessed and legal. Eliza doesn't belong to you anymore." "That paper was signed under duress," Wade shouted. "My daughter's a minor and I was drunk. It don't count." "She's 22, Rowan said flatly. "That's not a minor, and you being drunk was your own choice." Caleb urged his horse forward, his handsome face twisted with something ugly. "Look, Blackwood, this has gone on long enough. That child she's carrying is mine, which makes this my concern. I've got rights." "You've got nothing," Rowan interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You made sure of that when you denied her in front of the whole town, called her a liar, destroyed her reputation to save your own. You don't get to claim rights now just because your conscience started bothering you." "My conscience is fine," Caleb shot back. "But my fiancé's father is asking questions, and it's causing problems. Easier if the girl just disappears. We'll take her to a foundling home in Denver, let her have the baby there, then she can go wherever she wants. Clean solution for everyone." Eliza's hands were pressed against the window glass so hard her fingers were white. They weren't here to bring her home. They were here to hide her away, to erase the evidence of Caleb's indiscretion. Rowan's laugh was cold and entirely without humor. "Clean solution, that's what you're calling it." He shifted his grip on the rifle, the movement subtle but unmistakable. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn those horses around and ride back down this mountain. And you're never going to come back here, ever." "Or what?" Sheriff Moody tried to sound authoritative, but his voice shook slightly. "You going to shoot all of us, Blackwood? That'd make you a murderer for real instead of just rumored." "Maybe." Rowan's voice was utterly calm. "But you'd still be dead. And I'd still be up here, and Eliza would still be safe. So ask yourself, is Wade's pride worth your life? Is Caleb's reputation worth dying for?" The men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons they clearly weren't eager to draw. Then Eliza did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She unlocked her door, walked through the cabin, and stepped out onto the porch. "Eliza, get back inside," Rowan said without taking his eyes off the men. "No." Her voice was steady, stronger than she'd ever heard it. "This concerns me. I get to speak." Wade's face went purple. "Girl, you get down here right now. This man's got you brainwashed or scared or—" "He's given me a home," Eliza said clearly. "He's given me respect and safety and choices. He's given me everything you never did and everything Caleb promised and didn't deliver." She looked directly at Caleb, and for the first time since she'd told him about the baby, she saw him flinch. "You want a clean solution? Here it is. I'm staying. The baby's staying, and none of you have any say in that anymore." "Eliza," Caleb started, his voice taking on the pleading tone he'd used when he courted her. "Don't!" She cut him off. "Don't try that voice. Don't pretend you care. You had your chance to do right by me, and you chose your reputation instead. So now I'm choosing mine. I choose Rowan Blackwood. I choose this mountain. I choose a life where I'm not ashamed to exist." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Caleb's face went hard. "You're making a mistake." "No," Eliza said quietly. "I already made my mistake, believing you loved me. This is me fixing it." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then Sheriff Moody cleared his throat. "Wade, let's go. Girl's made her choice. She's of age, and there's nothing illegal happening here." "The hell there isn't," Wade roared. "She's my daughter." "She was your daughter," Rowan said, "until you sold her, remember? You took $100 in front of witnesses and signed away your rights. That makes her mine now, legally, and I say she stays." Wade's hand moved toward his pistol. Rowan's rifle came up so fast it was almost a blur aimed directly at Wade's chest. "Don't." The single word carried absolute certainty. This was a man who'd killed before, who knew exactly how to do it again, and who would if pushed far enough. Wade's hand froze. Around him, the other men were already backing their horses away, clearly unwilling to die for someone else's family drama. "This ain't over," Wade spat, but his voice had lost its conviction. Yeah, Rowan said. It is. They left slowly, Wade cursing the whole way, Caleb riding with his head down, the sheriff looking relieved to be leaving without bloodshed. Rowan didn't lower the rifle until they were completely out of sight, and even then he stood there for another 10 minutes, listening, making sure they were really gone. Finally, he turned to Eliza. She was still standing on the porch, shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, her arms wrapped around her belly. "You shouldn't have come out," he said, but there was no anger in it. "That was dangerous." "I know, but they needed to hear it from me." She met his eyes. "I meant what I said, Rowan. I choose this. I choose you." Something raw and vulnerable crossed his face. "Eliza, I know we're not. I know this isn't." She struggled for words. "I don't expect anything from you, but I need you to know that I'm here because I want to be. Not because I'm afraid to leave or because I don't have options. I'm here because in 2 months you've shown me more kindness than I've known in my whole life. Because you make me feel safe. Because when I think about the future, about raising this baby, I can't imagine doing it anywhere but here." Rowan was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, slowly, he walked up the porch steps until he was standing in front of her. Up close, she could see the war in his eyes, hope fighting with fear, want tangling with self-doubt. "You deserve better than a broken man on a mountain," he said quietly. "Maybe. But a broken man on a mountain is what I've got, and he's treated me better than any whole man ever did." She reached out tentatively and touched his hand, the one with the tremor, the one scarred by war and work. "I'm not asking for forever, Rowan. I'm just asking for now, for this, for us to keep building whatever this is, together." His hand turned under hers, calloused fingers curling around her smaller ones. "I'm not good at this," he warned. "At people. At feelings." "Neither am I," Eliza admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." And there, on the porch of a mountain cabin, while the sun climbed toward noon and the wind whispered through the pines, Rowan Blackwood allowed himself something he'd thought he'd lost the right to years ago. He allowed himself to hope. His fingers stayed wrapped around hers for a long moment, neither of them moving, both afraid that breaking the contact might shatter whatever fragile understanding they'd just reached. Then the baby kicked, hard enough that Eliza gasped, and the spell broke. Rowan's eyes dropped to her belly. That happened often. More every day, getting stronger. She placed his hand where hers had been, over the swell where the baby was moving. "Feel that?" His whole body went still. Under his palm, another kick, then another. When he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with something that might have been wonder. That's a whole person in there. Going to be anyway." Eliza smiled despite everything. "A whole person who's going to need a lot of things I don't know how to give them. We'll figure it out." The word we came out naturally, like it had been waiting for permission. "Together, like you said." They stood there another moment, Rowan's hand still on her belly, feeling the mysterious movements of the child who would change everything. Then he stepped back, his professional mask sliding into place, though it fit less comfortably than it had an hour ago. "I should check the perimeter, make sure they really left." He paused. "You all right? That must have been hard seeing your father again." "He stopped being my father the day he put me on those steps," Eliza said quietly. "Today just made it official." Rowan nodded, understanding in a way only someone who'd lost their own family could. Then he headed down toward the tree line, rifle in hand, leaving Eliza on the porch with her thoughts and the steady rhythm of the child growing inside her. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange, heightened awareness. Every sound made them both tense. Was it just the wind or horses approaching? Every trip Rowan made down the mountain to check his traps stretched longer in Eliza's mind, her imagination conjuring scenarios where her father returned with more men, better weapons, worse intentions. But the mountain stayed quiet except for its natural sounds, and slowly, carefully, they both began to believe that maybe the confrontation had really ended things. The weather turned as August bled into September. The nights grew colder, frost touching the highest peaks, and Rowan began the serious work of preparing for winter. He brought in firewood by the cord, stacking it under the porch roof until they had enough to burn for months. He smoked and salted meat, filled the root cellar with potatoes and carrots and turnips from the garden Eliza had nursed back to health. He checked every chink in the cabin walls, every shingle on the roof, preparing the way someone did when they knew what mountain winters could do. Eliza helped where she could, but her body was changing too fast now. The baby sat low and heavy, making her waddle more than walk. Her back ached constantly. Her ankles swelled by evening. Simple tasks left her breathless. "You need to rest more," Rowan told her one afternoon when he found her trying to haul water from the pump. "I need to be useful," she countered, stubbornness flashing. "I can't just sit while you do everything." "You're growing a whole human. That's useful enough." He took the bucket from her hands. "Besides, winter's coming. You'll need your strength for when the baby arrives." The baby. The reality of it was becoming impossible to ignore. Eliza's dresses barely fit anymore despite her letting them out repeatedly. She moved through the cabin like a ship navigating narrow waters, careful of her bulk, conscious of the precious cargo she carried. One evening in late September, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Eliza finally voiced the fear that had been growing alongside the child. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. My mother died before she could teach me, and it's not like Gravel Hollow had a doctor who'd talk to unwed girls about such things." Rowan set down the piece of leather he'd been working into a bridle. "There's a woman, Sarah Chen, lives in Silver Creek, about 2 days' ride from here. She's a midwife. Helped half the territory get born, by the accounts I've heard. I was thinking of riding over, asking if she'd come when your time gets close." "Would she? For someone like me?" "Someone like you," Rowan repeated, and there was an edge to his voice. "You mean someone who's survived more in 6 months than most people face in a lifetime? Someone who's strong enough to stand up to armed men and claim her own future?" He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Yeah, Eliza. I think she'd come for someone like you." The conviction in his voice made her throat tight. "When will you go?" "Soon, before the first real snow." He hesitated. "I don't like leaving you alone that long, but I'll be fine. I can shoot now, remember? And you'll be back before anything happens." She touched her belly. "Baby's not due for another 2 months at least." Still, he looked troubled. "A lot can go wrong in 2 days." "Then teach me what to watch for, what to do if someone comes." So he did. Over the next few days, Rowan walked her through every scenario he could imagine. Where to hide if she couldn't fight, how to bar the door from inside so it couldn't be forced, which supplies to grab if she needed to run into the woods. He showed her his cache of emergency provisions hidden in a hollow tree a quarter-mile from the cabin, enough to keep her alive for a week if she had to disappear. "You're scaring me," Eliza admitted after one particularly detailed session about what to do if the cabin caught fire. "Good. Scared keeps you alive." But then his expression softened. "I'm not trying to terrify you, Eliza. Just trying to make sure you know you've got options, that you're not helpless." "I never thought I was helpless when I'm with you." Something passed between them, one of those moments that had been happening more frequently, where the careful distance they maintained seemed arbitrary and foolish. Rowan looked like he wanted to say something, maybe do something, but the moment passed and he returned to his preparations. He left on a Tuesday morning when the sky was the deep blue that only came in early autumn. Eliza stood on the porch and watched him ride down the trail until the trees swallowed him, then went inside to face 2 days alone on the mountain. The first day passed easily enough. She kept busy with small tasks, mending, organizing, baking bread that filled the cabin with yeast and warmth. She practiced loading and firing the rifle Rowan had left her, working through the steps until they felt automatic. She talked to the baby, her hands on her belly, telling stories about the mountain and the man who'd given them both a home. The second day was harder. Time seemed to stretch, each hour longer than the last. She found herself jumping at every sound, a branch breaking, a bird call, the wind rattling the shutters. By evening, her nerves were stretched thin as wire. That's when she heard the horses. Her heart stopped, then kicked into overdrive. She grabbed the rifle, checked that it was loaded, and moved to the window. Through the gathering dusk, she saw them. 3 riders this time, not the group that had come before. But as they came closer, her stomach dropped. One of them was Caleb. She recognized his expensive hat, the way he sat his horse like he was posing for a portrait. The other two she didn't know, but they had the look of hired men, hard faces, harder eyes, guns worn like tools of their trade. They stopped in the yard where Rowan usually stood to greet visitors. Caleb dismounted, straightened his jacket, and called out, "Eliza, I know you're in there. I just want to talk. That's all. Just talk." Every instinct screamed not to answer, to stay hidden, to wait them out. But Eliza thought about what Rowan had said about being helpless, about having options. And she thought about how many times in her life she'd stayed silent when she should have spoken. She opened the door but stayed inside, the rifle visible in her hands. "Talk from there," she called back. "You're not welcome in this house." Caleb's smile was the same charming one he'd used when he courted her, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There's my girl. I was hoping we could be civilized about this." "I'm not your girl. I haven't been for months." "Say what you came to say, then leave." He took a step closer. The two hired men stayed mounted, watching the tree line, probably expecting Rowan to appear any moment. Good. Let them be nervous. "I've been thinking," Caleb said, "about us, about the baby, about how I handled things." He paused, like he expected her to fill the silence. When she didn't, he continued, "I made mistakes, Eliza. I was young and stupid and scared, but I've had time to reconsider. My engagement to Margaret, it's not what I want. You are. You and the child." The words were pretty, practiced. They might have worked once. Now they just made her tired. "No," she said simply. "No, you didn't even let me finish. I don't need to. The answer is no." She shifted her grip on the rifle, making sure he saw it. "You had your chance, Caleb. You chose to save yourself. I don't blame you for that anymore, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm not going to go back to being the girl who believed your promises." His face hardened. "You think Blackwood's better? You think a crazy mountain man who can't even live around people is going to give you a good life? Give that baby a future? He's given me more in 3 months than you gave me in a year of courting." Eliza's voice stayed level, but steel ran underneath. "He's given me honesty, respect, a home where I don't have to apologize for existing. So yes, Caleb, I think he's better. He bought you like property, and you tried to make me disappear like trash. I know which one feels worse." She took a breath. "Now leave. Rowan will be back tomorrow, and if he finds you here, there won't be talking. There'll be shooting." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. From him and from me." She raised the rifle slightly, not quite aiming, but making her point clear. "I've learned to shoot, Caleb, and I'm scared enough right now that I might not be too careful about where I aim. So I suggest you get on your horse and ride back to town and marry Margaret and forget I exist, because I'm done being your problem." One of the hired men cleared his throat. "Harlan, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Caleb snapped, but he was already backing toward his horse, his bravado cracking. "You're making a mistake, Eliza. When that baby comes and you're stuck on this mountain with a madman, don't come crying to me." "I won't," she said. "I don't cry to cowards anymore." His face went purple, but he mounted his horse. The three of them wheeled around and rode back down the trail, Caleb looking back once with something like disbelief that she'd actually refused him. Eliza stood in the doorway until they were gone, until even the sound of hoofbeats faded into the evening. Then her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, the rifle clattering beside her, her whole body shaking with delayed fear. She'd done it. She'd faced them alone and held her ground and sent them away. But the cost showed in her trembling hands, her racing heart, the tears that came hot and fast now that there was no one to see them. That's how Rowan found her the next morning, curled up just inside the doorway, the rifle beside her, her eyes red from crying herself to sleep. He was off his horse before it fully stopped, crossing the porch in 2 strides, kneeling beside her with terror and fury warring in his expression. "Eliza. Eliza, what happened? Are you hurt?" She woke to his hands on her shoulders, gentle despite his obvious panic. For a moment she was disoriented, then everything came rushing back. "Caleb came," she said, her voice hoarse. "Last night, with 2 men. Rowan went absolutely still. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Did they touch you?" No, I sent them away. I told Caleb to leave, and I meant it, and he did." She pushed herself up to sitting, wincing at the stiffness in her back. But I was scared, Rowan. I kept the rifle and I didn't let them inside and I did everything you taught me, but I was so scared. He pulled her into his arms then, the first time he'd fully embraced her, and she felt him shaking too. I shouldn't have left you. Damn it, I knew better. You had to. We need the midwife. Eliza pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in leather and pine smoke and safety. And I was all right. I handled it. You shouldn't have had to. His arms tightened around her. I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm so damn sorry. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other on the cabin floor, two broken people trying to piece together something whole. Finally, Rowan pulled back enough to see her face. Sarah Chen agreed to come, he said. When the time gets close, I'll ride to Silver Creek and bring her here. She'll stay until after the birth. Make sure you and the baby are all right. He paused. She also said she'd be willing to witness a marriage, if that's something you wanted. Eliza's breath caught. A marriage? I'm not proposing, Rowan said quickly. Not romantically. I'm offering practicality. If we're married, you have legal protection. The baby has legitimacy. It makes things cleaner, safer. But if you don't want that, if it feels like I'm trying to trap you the way— Yes, Eliza interrupted. He blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. She saw his surprise and smiled despite everything. Not because I feel trapped, not because I need legitimacy, but because you're right. It makes things cleaner. And because— She hesitated, then pushed forward with the truth. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like shelter and started feeling like home. You stopped feeling like a stranger and started feeling like someone I want to build a life with. Even though I'm broken, his voice was raw. Even though I've got darkness in me you haven't seen yet. Even though, maybe because of— She touched his face, scarred and beautiful in its hardness. I'm broken too, Rowan. Maybe we fit together because of the cracks, not in spite of them. He kissed her then, not desperately, not with passion born of fear, but softly, carefully, like he was afraid she might disappear if he held too tight. Eliza kissed him back, her hands finding the rough fabric of his shirt, holding on to something solid and real and hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. We'll do it right, he said. When the baby comes, Sarah can witness, make it legal and proper. Until then, he pulled back to look at her seriously. Until then, nothing changes unless you want it to. You still have your room, your lock, your choices. What if I don't want my room anymore? The question came out braver than Eliza felt. His eyes darkened with want and restraint fighting each other. Then we move at whatever pace you need. No rushing, no pressure. Just us, figuring it out together. Together, Eliza agreed, and the word felt like a vow all by itself. The next weeks transformed something fundamental between them. Rowan moved his bedroll from the loft to the main room, giving Eliza space but staying close enough to hear if she called. They fell into new patterns. Rowan's hand finding the small of her back as he passed her in the cabin. Eliza leaning into his warmth while they watched the fire in the evenings. Small touches that spoke of growing comfort and deepening trust. They talked more than they ever had, sharing stories that revealed the people they'd been before life had broken them. Eliza learned that Rowan had once loved music, that his mother had taught him to play fiddle before she died, that he'd had a younger sister who'd died of scarlet fever when she was 7, and that losing her had been his first real encounter with the unfairness of the world. Rowan learned that Eliza had wanted to be a teacher before her mother died, and her father's drinking made such dreams impossible, that she'd taught herself advanced arithmetic from a book she'd found in the general store's back room, that she was scared of dogs because one had bitten her when she was small, but she was working on it with Rowan's old hound who'd taken to sleeping on her porch most nights. What should we name the baby? Eliza asked one evening as they sat together, her feet in his lap while he rubbed the ache from them, another new intimacy that felt both strange and necessary. That's your choice, Rowan said. Your baby. Our baby, she corrected gently. If you're going to be the father who raises them, you get a say in the name. his hands stilled on her feet. You mean that? Every word. She looked at him seriously. Caleb provided the seed, but you're building the life this child will grow up in. That makes you the father in every way that matters. Rowan's eyes were suspiciously bright. He cleared his throat roughly. All right then. Our baby. What kind of name were you thinking? They debated it over the following days, testing out options like trying on clothes to see what fit, traditional names, unusual names, names from their own families. Nothing felt quite right until one morning when Eliza woke to find fresh snow dusting the mountain, the first real snow of the season, and something clicked into place. Hope, she said at breakfast. If it's a girl, Hope, because that's what this has been, what you've given me. Rowan set down his coffee cup carefully. And if it's a boy? I was thinking Samuel. My mother's father was Samuel. He died before I was born, but she always spoke of him with love. She paused. Unless you have a family name you'd prefer. Samuel's good. Samuel Blackwood. He tested the sound of it. Yeah, that works. Samuel or Hope Blackwood, Eliza repeated, and for the first time the baby felt completely real. Not just a consequence or a complication, but a person with a name and a future, and two people who would fight the world to protect them. October arrived with cold winds and the first hard frost. The aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, brilliant against the dark pines. Eliza's body grew heavier, more cumbersome. She waddled now even on flat ground, her back constantly aching, the baby's movements sometimes so strong they took her breath away. Getting close, Rowan observed one evening as he helped her settle into the rocking chair he'd made. Maybe another month. Maybe less, Eliza said. I feel different lately, like everything's shifting, settling. His expression tightened with worry. I should ride for Sarah soon, before the weather turns bad. Not yet. Another week or two. She reached for his hand. I'm not ready to share you yet. He knelt beside her chair, his hand covering hers. You won't have to share me, but I need to know you're safe, that you'll have help when the time comes. I know, just a little longer. She couldn't explain the feeling that had come over her, the sense that these were the last days of their quiet privacy, that once the baby arrived and the midwife witnessed their marriage, everything would change in ways she couldn't take back. She wanted to hold this moment a little longer, this space where it was just the two of them learning to be something more than strangers bound by transaction. Rowan seemed to understand. He stayed kneeling beside her chair, their hands linked, watching the fire while the wind howled outside, and the first real storm of the season built itself in the darkness beyond their windows. That night, Eliza woke to wetness between her legs and a pain that clenched her whole belly like a fist. She lay still for a moment, trying to understand what was happening, then realization hit with terrifying clarity. The baby was coming. Now. And Sarah Chen was 2 days' ride away through mountains that might already be filling with snow. Rowan, she called, trying to keep the panic from her voice. Rowan, I need you. He was beside her in seconds, lighting a lamp with shaking hands. When he saw her face, saw the way she was clutching her belly, all the color drained from his features. It's too soon, she whispered. It's not supposed to be yet. But the baby, it seemed, had made its own decision about when to arrive. And as another contraction hit, harder than the first, Eliza looked into Rowan's terrified eyes and saw her own fear reflected back. They were alone on a mountain in the middle of a gathering storm, and she was about to give birth with no midwife, no doctor, and no idea if either of them would survive what came next. Rowan's face went through a series of expressions in the lamplight, fear, determination, then something like forced calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. All right, we can do this. His voice was steadier than his hands. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We just need to think. I can't think, Eliza gasped as another contraction gripped her. It hurts, Rowan. It hurts so much. He was already moving, his military training kicking in the way it did when crisis demanded action over emotion. I'm going to get you to the bed. Can you walk? She nodded, gritting her teeth, and he helped her stand. The few steps to the bed felt like miles, and by the time she was lying down, she was panting and tears were streaming down her face. I need to check the storm, Rowan said, already heading for the door. See if I can make it to Silver Creek. No! Eliza's voice came out sharp with panic. Don't leave me! Please, Rowan, don't leave me alone! He stopped, torn between action and staying, between what he thought he should do and what she needed. Then he came back to her side, his calloused hand finding hers. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Snow was definitely coming, maybe already falling on the higher peaks. Even if Rowan left now, he wouldn't make it to Silver Creek and back before the baby came. They both knew it, even if neither wanted to say it aloud. Tell me what to do, Eliza whispered between contractions. You've seen injuries in the war. You must know something about bodies and pain, and birth is different. But he was already thinking, his mind racing through fragments of memory. I saw one birth in a field hospital once. The surgeon let me stay because we needed every pair of hands. I remember some things. Not enough, but some. Then use what you remember. Another contraction hit and Eliza arched against it, her hand crushing Rowan's. When it passed, she looked at him with desperate trust. I believe in you. If anyone can help me through this, it's you. Something shifted in his expression. The fear didn't leave, but it was joined by resolve. All right, first, we need supplies. Clean cloths, hot water, scissors we can sterilize. The cradle ready and lined with soft fabric. Blankets. More light. He was talking to himself as much as to her, organizing his thoughts like he was planning a campaign. And you need to save your strength. Between the pains, you rest. Don't fight what's coming. Ride with it. He moved through the cabin with purpose, gathering what they'd need. He stoked the fire until it roared, set water to boil, laid out the scissors and thread he'd use when the baby came. He brought the cradle close to the bed and lined it with the softest flannel they had. All the while, Eliza breathed through contractions that were coming faster now, each one a wave that tried to pull her under. How far apart? Rowan asked, checking the pocket watch he'd pulled from somewhere. I don't know. 5 minutes? Less? Time had stopped meaning anything beyond the space between pains. He nodded, his jaw tight. It's moving fast. Probably because this isn't your first pregnancy. The body knows what to do even if we don't. That doesn't make sense. I've never had a baby before. But you were pregnant once before. The miscarriage you had when you were 16. He said it gently, and Eliza's eyes widened with shock. How did you know about that? I never told anyone. You talk in your sleep sometimes. Fragments of things. He squeezed her hand. I wasn't prying. But your body remembers, even if it was different. It might help now. She wanted to feel violated that he knew her deepest secret, the pregnancy she'd lost after her mother died, the one her father had beaten her for until it ended in blood and pain. But there was no judgment in Rowan's eyes, only understanding and the fierce protectiveness that had become as familiar to her as breathing. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and Eliza cried out despite trying to stay quiet. Rowan was there immediately, supporting her shoulders, letting her grip his arm hard enough to bruise. Breathe through it, he coached. In through your nose, out through your mouth, like you're blowing out a candle. That's it. Good. The hours that followed blurred into a nightmare landscape of pain and fear, punctuated by moments of desperate tenderness. Rowan never left her side except to refresh the water or grab more cloths. He wiped her face when the sweat poured down, held her hand when the contractions peaked, talked to her in a low, steady voice that became her anchor in the storm of childbirth. Tell me about St. Louis, she gasped between pains. Tell me about your father's shop. So he did. His voice weaving stories of sawdust and varnish, of learning to read the grain of wood, of the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from rough lumber. He told her about his first commissioned piece, a rocking chair for a wealthy merchant's wife, and how proud his father had been. He told her about the smell of the workshop, the sound of planes shaving wood, the way sunlight would slant through the windows in the afternoon. Eliza clung to his words like a lifeline, letting them carry her through the worst of the contractions. When the pain got too bad, when she screamed or sobbed or begged for it to stop, Rowan never told her to be quiet or to be brave. He just held her and told her she was doing perfectly, that she was the strongest person he'd ever known, that she was going to survive this and meet her baby and everything would be worth it. Somewhere past midnight, the contractions changed. The pain that had been wave-like became constant, pressing, unbearable. Eliza felt something shift deep inside her, a pressure that made her gasp. "Something's different," she panted. "Rowan, something's happening." He moved quickly to examine her, his hands gentle but sure despite his obvious discomfort with the intimacy. What he saw made his face go pale, then flush with something like relief. "The baby's coming, right now." He positioned himself at the foot of the bed. "Eliza, listen to me. When the next pain comes, I need you to push. Push as hard as you can, like you're trying to—" He searched for words. "Like you're trying to move a mountain. Can you do that?" "I don't know, but—" "Yes, you do. You're the woman who stood up to armed men, who chose her own life when everyone said you had no choice. You can do this." His eyes locked on hers, fierce and certain. "Push, Eliza. Bring our baby into the world." The next contraction hit like a freight train, and Eliza bore down with everything she had. The pressure was enormous, splitting, impossible, and then suddenly there was movement, progress, the sense of something giving way. "That's it!" Rowan's voice cracked with emotion. "I can see the head. Dark hair. Lots of it. One more like that, Eliza. One more big push." She didn't know where she found the strength. Her body was screaming, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever experienced. But she reached deep, found some reserve she didn't know existed, and pushed with everything left in her. The release was sudden and overwhelming. The pressure vanished, replaced by a feeling of emptiness and the sound of Rowan's sharp intake of breath. "I've got her," he said, and his voice was shaking. "I've got her, Eliza. It's a girl." Then came a sound that made Eliza's heart stop and restart, a thin, angry wail that filled the cabin like a declaration of life. Rowan was moving quickly now, doing things he must have remembered from that field hospital years ago. He cleared the baby's mouth and nose, tied off and cut the cord with hands that trembled but didn't falter, wrapped the tiny body in clean flannel. "Is she all right?" Eliza asked desperately, trying to see. "Rowan, is she—" "She's perfect." He brought the baby to her, placing the tiny bundle in her arms with a reverence usually reserved for holy things. "She's absolutely perfect." Eliza looked down at her daughter for the first time and felt the world reorganize itself around this moment. The baby was small, smaller than she'd expected, with a shock of dark hair plastered to her head and a face scrunched in newborn outrage. But she was breathing, wailing, alive, real in a way nothing else had ever been real. "Hope," Eliza whispered, touching one impossibly tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around hers instinctively, and something in Eliza's chest cracked open, spilling out a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "Hello, Hope. I'm your mother." Rowan sank onto the edge of the bed, his face streaked with tears he didn't seem to notice. He reached out tentatively and touched the baby's head with one scarred finger, his expression full of wonder. "We did it," he said hoarsely. "You did it." "We did it," Eliza corrected, and pulled him closer with her free arm. For a long moment, they sat like that. Three people who were now a family, held together by survival and choice, and something that felt dangerously close to love. But they weren't done yet. There was still the afterbirth to deliver, which came easier than Eliza expected, but left her feeling weak and hollowed out. Rowan dealt with it efficiently, cleaning up with the same steady competence he'd shown through everything else. Then he helped Eliza into a clean nightgown, changed the bedding beneath her, made sure she was comfortable. "You need to try to feed her," he said, and the fact that he knew this, that he'd paid attention during that long-ago birth enough to remember the details, made Eliza's throat tight. "It'll help your body recover, and the baby needs it." Getting Hope to latch was harder than Eliza expected, but eventually the baby figured it out and began to nurse with single-minded intensity. The sensation was strange and uncomfortable, and intimate in ways Eliza hadn't anticipated, but watching her daughter's face relax into contentment made every moment of the pain worth it. Rowan watched them both with an expression Eliza couldn't quite name. Then he stood. "I should let you rest. You've been through—" "Stay." Eliza's hand shot out to catch his. "Please. I don't want to be alone. Either of us." He hesitated only a moment before lowering himself back onto the bed, carefully avoiding jostling them. He propped himself against the headboard and let Eliza lean into his shoulder, the baby cradled between them. Outside, the storm that had been building finally broke. Snow began to fall in earnest, fat flakes that turned the world beyond the windows into a whiteout. But inside the cabin, wrapped in firelight and blankets and the profound quiet that came after crisis, 3 people breathed in sync and learned the shape of their new reality. "I was so scared," Eliza admitted when Hope had fallen asleep, tiny and perfect against her chest. "I thought we were both going to die." "So was I." Rowan's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I've been shot at, seen men die in ways I still have nightmares about, but I've never been more terrified than I was tonight. Watching you in that much pain and knowing I might not be able to help you." His voice broke. "I couldn't lose you, Eliza. Somewhere along the way, you became the reason I get up in the morning. You, and now her." She turned her head to look at him, saw the raw vulnerability in his face. "I love you," she said, and the words came easier than she'd expected. "I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you, Rowan Blackwood." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I love you too. Have for weeks, maybe longer. I just didn't think I had the right to say it." "You have the right." She kissed him softly, carefully, mindful of the baby sleeping between them. "You've earned every right there is." They stayed like that through the rest of the night, watching Hope sleep, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. Plans for the future, fears about raising a child on a mountain, wonder at the miracle they'd created together even though biology said otherwise. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky and the storm outside started to ease, Eliza felt something settle deep in her chest, a certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next 2 days passed in a haze of exhaustion and adjustment. Eliza's body ached in new and creative ways, but Rowan was there for everything, helping her to the necessary, bringing her food and water, changing Hope's clothes when needed with a squeamishness he tried hard to hide. He'd clearly never dealt with a newborn before, but he approached it the way he approached everything else, with careful attention and determination not to fail. Hope proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping in stretches of 3 or 4 hours, waking to nurse with angry efficiency, then drifting back to sleep in the cradle Rowan had made. But even an easy baby changed everything. The cabin that had been quiet now filled with the sounds of infant breathing, small grunts and sighs, occasional crying that sent both adults into a panic until they figured out what she needed. On the 3rd morning after the birth, when Hope was sleeping peacefully and Eliza was starting to feel almost human again, they heard horses approaching through the snow. Rowan's hand went immediately to his rifle, his whole body tensing. "Stay here. Lock the door after me." But when he opened the door, the people in the yard made him lower the weapon in surprise. It was Sarah Chen, the midwife from Silver Creek, riding a sturdy mountain horse and leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. Behind her, unexpectedly, was Sheriff Moody. "We came as soon as the storm cleared," Sarah called out, swinging down from her horse with the ease of long practice. She was a small woman, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. "Got word from a trapper that you were asking about birthing help, and when this storm hit, I figured you might need it sooner than expected." "Baby came 3 nights ago," Rowan said, still holding the rifle but lowered now. "Mother and child are both alive." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "You delivered her yourself?" "Didn't have much choice." "Well, I'd better check them both anyway. First babies are tricky, even when everything goes right." She gestured to the sheriff. "Moody here insisted on coming along, said he had business with you." The sheriff dismounted more slowly, his face unreadable. Rowan stepped aside to let Sarah into the cabin, but he blocked the sheriff's path. "What kind of business?" Moody pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "The legal kind. Got a complaint filed in Gravel Hollow yesterday. Wade Carter claims you're holding his daughter against her will and refusing to let family visit. Says he wants the law to check on her welfare." Rowan's jaw clenched. "Wade Carter sold his daughter and signed away all rights to her. He's got no standing to—" "I know what he did." The sheriff's voice was tired. "I witnessed the damn paper, remember? But he's making noise and the territorial judge is asking questions, and I can't just ignore it." He looked past Rowan toward the cabin. "I need to talk to Miss Carter. Make sure she's here by choice. That's all. Inside, Sarah had already found Eliza and Hope and was conducting an examination with brisk efficiency. Well, you're both alive, which is more than some girls manage without proper help. Let me see how you're healing. She worked quickly, checking things that made Eliza blush despite everything she'd just been through. Not bad. You tore a little, but it's healing clean. You're young and strong. That helps. The baby's small but healthy, good color, good reflexes. She looked up at Rowan with something like respect. You did well, Mountain Man. Most men would have panicked. I did panic, Rowan admitted. I just didn't let it stop me. That's when Sheriff Moody appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. Miss Carter, I need to ask you some questions. Eliza pulled the blanket higher, suddenly very aware of her vulnerability. But she met the sheriff's eyes steadily. Ask. Are you here against your will? No. Has Mr. Blackwood hurt you or threatened you in any way? Never. He's been nothing but kind. Your father says you're being held prisoner, says a man like Blackwood wouldn't let you leave even if you wanted to. Eliza's laugh was sharp and bitter. My father is a drunk and a liar. The only person who ever held me prisoner was him. Rowan gave me freedom, a locked door with the key on my side. Choices about my own life, respect I never had in that town. She paused, then added with quiet fury, and my father has no right to claim concern now. He sold me like livestock and took money for it. If you're here to take me back to him, you'll have to drag me, and I'll fight every step of the way. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you, but the judge will want something official. Something in writing that says you're here by choice. Then I'll write it. Eliza held out her hand. Give me paper and pen, and I'll write whatever statement you need. Sarah, who'd been listening quietly while repacking her supplies, spoke up. While you're making things official, you might want to handle the marriage too. I'm licensed to perform ceremonies in the territory. If these two want to make things legal before some busybody tries to take the baby based on illegitimacy claims, now's the time. Eliza and Rowan's eyes met across the room. They'd talked about marriage, planned for it eventually, but in the chaos of Hope's early arrival, it had been pushed aside. Now, with the sheriff standing witness and threats from Gravel Hollow circling like wolves, the practical need became urgent. Yes, Eliza said firmly. I want to marry him. Today, now, before you leave. Rowan crossed to her side, his hand finding hers. You're sure? You don't want time to think about it. Make it proper. I've never been more sure of anything. She squeezed his hand. Marry me, Rowan Blackwood. Make us a real family. His answer was in his eyes before his voice caught up. Yes. Let's do this. Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving, the expression transforming her stern face into something almost warm. All right then, Sheriff, you're witnessing. Miss Carter, if you're well enough to stand, I'm well enough. Eliza pushed herself upright, wincing at the soreness but determined. Rowan helped her to her feet, keeping his arm around her waist for support. They stood together in front of the fireplace, Eliza in her nightgown and robe, Rowan in his work clothes, both of them exhausted and terrified and absolutely certain. Hope slept in her cradle nearby, oblivious to the ceremony that would make her legitimate in the eyes of the law. Sarah pulled out a small, worn book and opened it to a marked page. We'll keep this simple. Rowan Blackwood, do you take this woman as your lawful wife to honor and protect in sickness and health for as long as you both live? I do. His voice was steady, his eyes on Eliza. Eliza May Carter, do you take this man as your lawful husband to honor and stand beside in sickness and health for as long as you both live? I do. She said it clearly, wanting there to be no doubt. Then, by the authority granted to me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. What you've joined here, let no man separate. Sarah closed the book. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Blackwood. Rowan cupped Eliza's face in both hands and kissed her softly, reverently, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. Sheriff Moody cleared his throat roughly. I'll need you both to sign the license. Make it official for the records. They signed with shaking hands, Eliza May Blackwood, Rowan James Blackwood, witnessed by Sarah Chen and Sheriff Thomas Moody. Just like that, in a mountain cabin still smelling of birth and snow, they became a married couple. "I'll file this in Silver Creek," the sheriff said, folding the paper carefully. "And I'll make a report that Miss Carter, Mrs. Blackwood now, is here by free choice and is well cared for. That should settle Wade's complaints." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened in town. Should have stepped in sooner, stopped him from auctioning you off like that. It was wrong." "It was wrong," Eliza agreed. "But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have Hope, wouldn't have Rowan. So maybe some wrong turns lead to right places after all." After the sheriff left, Sarah stayed 3 more days. She taught Eliza things about caring for a newborn that only experience could teach. How to tell different kinds of cries apart, how to help Hope when she was gassy, how to care for herself while her body healed. She taught Rowan, too, showing him how to support the baby's head, how to change cloths efficiently, how to help his wife without hovering. "You two are going to be fine," Sarah said on the morning she prepared to leave. "Better than fine. That baby's got 2 parents who'll fight the world for her, and that's more than most children get." She looked at Rowan seriously. "You did good, bringing her into the world safe. Not many men could have kept their heads through that." "I didn't have a choice," Rowan said quietly. "Failing wasn't an option." "It's always an option. You just chose not to take it." Sarah mounted her horse, her supplies packed. "I'll check on you in the spring, make sure everyone's still thriving. Until then, trust yourselves. You know more than you think you do." She rode down the mountain through snow that was already starting to melt in the bright October sun, leaving the Blackwood family alone again. But this time, officially bound by law and choice and the tiny life they'd created together. That night, with Hope asleep in her cradle and the cabin quiet around them, Rowan and Eliza lay together in the bed they now shared, carefully, mindful of her healing body, but together nonetheless. His arm was around her shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Eliza whispered, "that this will all have been a dream, and I'll be back in that room above my father's store, alone and scared and ashamed." "It's real." Rowan's hand stroked her hair gently. "You're my wife. Hope is our daughter. This is our home. All of it real. All of it ours." "How did we get so lucky?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't know if luck had anything to do with it. I think we both got to the end of what we could survive alone, and then we found each other. Or maybe we found the courage to choose something different than what the world expected from us." "Do you think they'll leave us alone now? My father, Caleb, all of them?" "I think the marriage and the sheriff's report will help. But men like your father don't let go of their pride easy." His arm tightened around her. "If they come back, we'll handle it. Together. Same as everything else." Eliza shifted to look up at him, her hand on his chest. "I meant what I said during the ceremony. I'm going to stand beside you, Rowan. Not behind you, not sheltered by you, beside you. Whatever comes." His eyes were dark and serious in the firelight. "I know. That's what makes this work. You're not looking to be saved. You're looking to build something." "With you," she confirmed. "Only with you." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and she felt the want in it, the restraint. They weren't ready yet, her body still healing, both of them exhausted, the baby likely to wake any moment. But the promise was there, the knowledge that when the time was right, they'd have that too. Another piece of the life they were building together. For now, this was enough. The warmth of the fire, the soft breathing of their daughter, the solid presence of each other. They'd survived the worst and come out the other side changed but whole, broken but healing, alone but together. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled across the mountains. Not a storm, just the sound of the world shifting into its winter patterns. But inside the cabin on Pinegrave Ridge, 3 people slept peacefully, wrapped in blankets and new beginnings, and the fierce, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found their way home. The first snow of November came heavy and stayed, transforming Pinegrave Ridge into a world of white silence, broken only by the sounds of their small family learning to exist together. Hope grew stronger each day, her initial fragility giving way to the robust health of a well-loved child. She nursed eagerly, slept in stretches that gradually lengthened, and began to focus her dark eyes on the faces that hovered above her cradle with wonder and devotion. Eliza healed slowly but surely, her body remembering its strength even as it adjusted to the demands of new motherhood. The soreness faded, the exhaustion became manageable, and by the time Hope was 3 weeks old, Eliza felt almost like herself again, or rather, like a new version of herself, one shaped by survival and sacrifice and the fierce protectiveness that came with holding your child in your arms. Rowan moved through those early weeks with the focused intensity he brought to everything important. He kept the fire burning, the cabin warm, the food coming. He took Hope in the middle of the night when Eliza was too exhausted to function, walking the floor with the baby against his shoulder, humming tuneless songs until she settled back to sleep. He watched his wife and daughter with an expression that shifted between wonder and terror, like he couldn't quite believe they were real and feared at any moment someone would take them away. They were careful with each other in those first weeks, navigating the intimacy of marriage while still learning each other's boundaries. Rowan slept beside Eliza now, but kept space between them, mindful of her healing body. They touched often, hands brushing as they passed the baby between them, his arm around her shoulders while they sat by the fire, her head resting against his chest in the moments between sleep and waking. But it was gentle, exploratory, the physical expression of trust still being built. One evening in late November, after Hope had been fed and settled in her cradle, Eliza found Rowan at his workbench in the corner of the cabin. He was carving something small, his hands moving with the careful precision that belied his tremor. "What are you making?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. He held up a small wooden horse, no bigger than his palm, the details already emerging from the rough shape. "Toy. Figured she'd need something to play with eventually." Eliza's throat tightened. "She won't be able to hold things for months yet." "I know, but winter's long up here, and I need something to do with my hands when she's sleeping." He ran his thumb over the horse's mane, checking the smoothness. "Besides, by the time she can use it, I'll have a whole collection. Horses, maybe some other animals. A Noah's Ark, perhaps." She watched him work for a moment, this man who'd bought her to save himself as much as to save her, who delivered their daughter with shaking hands and fierce determination, who now carved toys for a future he was learning to believe in. "You're a good father, Rowan." His hands stilled. "I don't know about that. I'm just trying not to fail her." "That's what good fathers do. They try." Eliza placed her hand over his. "My father never tried. Yours did, from what you've told me. That's the difference." He set down the carving and turned to face her fully. In the firelight, his scarred features looked softer, the hard edges worn smooth by weeks of domesticity. "I never thought I'd have this. A wife, a child, a reason to wake up that wasn't just survival." His hand came up to cup her face. "You gave me that, Eliza. You and Hope." "We gave it to each other," she corrected, and leaned in to kiss him. This kiss was different from the careful ones they'd shared before. There was heat in it, want that had been building through weeks of proximity and restraint. Rowan responded immediately, pulling her closer, his other hand tangling in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, his eyes were dark with need. "Are you—" he started, then stopped. "The midwife said 6 weeks at least. It's only been 4. "I know what she said." Eliza's hand moved to his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing under her palm. "But I also know my own body, and I'm ready, if you are." "I've been ready since the day you stepped out on that porch and chose me in front of half of Gravel Hollow." His voice was rough. "But I won't rush you, won't hurt you." "You won't." She took his hand and led him to their bed, past the cradle where Hope slept peacefully, to the space they'd been sharing but not fully claiming. "Love me, Rowan. Make this marriage real in every way." What followed was tentative and tender, two people learning each other's bodies with reverence and care. Rowan was gentle to the point of hesitation, constantly checking that she was all right, that nothing hurt. Eliza guided him with touches and whispered encouragement, showing him what she needed, learning what made his breath catch and his control slip. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, adjustments, soft laughter at their inexperience with each other. But it was theirs, honest and intimate and achingly real. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Eliza's head on Rowan's chest, his arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might disappear. Through the window, snow fell steadily, adding to the drifts that already reached halfway up the cabin walls. "We're snowed in now," Rowan said quietly. "Won't be able to get down the mountain until spring, probably." "Good," Eliza murmured. "Let the world forget we exist for a while. I'm not ready to share this yet." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Neither am I." December brought deeper cold and shorter days, the sun barely climbing above the southern peaks before beginning its descent. They settled into rhythms that felt ancient and new all at once. Rowan checking his trap lines on snowshoes, coming back with rabbit or the occasional winter-thin deer. Eliza tending Hope, cooking, keeping the cabin warm and livable. Together in the evenings by the fire, talking or working on small projects or simply being, the baby between them growing bigger and more alert with each passing day. Hope began to smile in her 6th week, that first real smile that wasn't just gas or reflex, but genuine recognition and joy. She gave it to Rowan first, looking up at him while he changed her cloth, and the expression on his face made Eliza's heart ache with love for both of them. "She smiled at me," he said, his voice full of wonder. "She actually smiled." "Of course she did. You're her father." Eliza came to stand beside him, looking down at their daughter. "She knows you. Knows your voice, your smell, your touch. You're her whole world." "We're her whole world," Rowan corrected, and pulled Eliza close with his free arm. "And she's ours." It was true. In the isolation of winter on the mountain, the three of them had become a universe unto themselves. The cabin felt less like shelter and more like home with each day. Eliza had sewn curtains for all the windows, made cushions for the rocking chair, organized every shelf and corner until the space reflected both of them. Rowan had built additional storage, repaired anything that showed wear, made the structure sound enough to last generations. One evening in mid-December, while Hope nursed and Rowan whittled another toy animal, a bear this time, Eliza voiced something that had been bothering her. "Do you think they'll come back? In the spring, when the snow melts?" Rowan didn't stop carving, but his jaw tightened. "Maybe. Your father's the type to hold grudges, and Caleb's got a reputation to protect." "I'm not afraid of them anymore." Eliza adjusted Hope to her other breast. "Not the way I was, but I worry about Hope, about what they might try to do, what claims they might make. The marriage is legal. The birth is registered with Sarah as witness. Hope's name is Blackwood on all the paperwork." He set down his carving and looked at her seriously. "They've got no legal standing, and if they try force, they'll find out I'm done being civilized about it." The flat certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safe. "I don't want you to have to kill anyone for us." "Neither do I. But I will if it comes to that." He stood and came to sit beside her on the bed, his hand gentle on Hope's dark hair. "I told you once that I've got darkness in me. That's true. But I've also got something now that's worth protecting at any cost. I won't let anyone take you away from me, either of you." Eliza reached for his hand. "Then we'll face it together, when the time comes. But until then, let's just be us, just our family, learning to be happy." "Are you?" The question came out vulnerable, uncertain. "Happy, I mean." She looked around the cabin, at the cradle Rowan had made, the curtains she'd sewn, the food they'd preserved together, the warmth and safety and belonging they'd built from nothing. Then she looked at Hope, nursing contentedly, and at Rowan, scarred and broken and trying so hard to be good. "Yes," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy." His kiss was soft and lingering, full of gratitude and relief and the growing certainty that maybe he was allowed to be happy too. The winter deepened, January arriving with temperatures that made the walls creak and the windows frost over in intricate patterns. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, but Rowan had prepared well, and there was plenty. The world beyond the cabin became abstract, distant, irrelevant. What mattered was keeping Hope warm and fed, keeping each other sane through the long, dark months, maintaining the small routines that gave structure to their days. Hope grew rapidly, her features becoming more defined. She had Eliza's nose and chin, but her eyes were darker, deeper, with a seriousness that seemed to come from neither parent. She was a quiet baby, rarely fussing unless hungry or uncomfortable, content to lie in her cradle and watch the play of firelight on the ceiling or study the faces that hovered above her with such devotion. "She's beautiful," Eliza whispered one night, watching Hope sleep. "I can't believe something so perfect came from me." "From us," Rowan said from behind her, his arms coming around her waist. "She's got your strength in her. I can see it already. The way she fights when she's angry, the way she settles when she's content. That's all you." "And you," Eliza countered, leaning back against his chest. "Your stubbornness, your focus, the way she watches everything so carefully before deciding how to react." They stood like that for a long time, watching their daughter sleep, both silently marveling that they'd created something so precious from pain and desperation and the determination to survive. February brought the first hints of spring, days where the temperature climbed above freezing, where snow began to melt from the southern-facing slopes, where the quality of light changed from winter's harsh clarity to something softer. With the changing season came a tension that neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. Soon the trails would be passable. Soon the isolation that had protected them would end. Soon they'd have to face the world beyond their mountain again. The reckoning came on a morning in early March, when the snow had melted enough to reveal mud and last year's dead grass. Rowan had gone out to check his traps, leaving Eliza and Hope in the cabin. He'd been gone perhaps an hour when Eliza heard horses, multiple horses, moving fast up the trail. Her heart kicked hard. She grabbed the rifle, made sure it was loaded, and positioned herself where she could see out the window while staying behind cover. Hope was asleep in her cradle, oblivious to the danger approaching. The riders came into view, and Eliza's blood ran cold. There were 6 of them this time: her father, Caleb, Sheriff Moody, and 3 men she didn't recognize but who had the look of hired guns. They stopped in the yard, and Wade climbed down from his horse with the exaggerated care of a man who'd been drinking. "Eliza!" he shouted. "I know you're in there. Come out, girl. We need to talk." She stayed silent, her finger on the rifle's trigger, her mind racing. Where was Rowan? How long until he heard the commotion and came back? "Don't be difficult," Caleb called out, his voice carrying that smooth charm that had once fooled her. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want to discuss the situation. Come to an arrangement that works for everyone." "The arrangement is that you leave," Eliza shouted back, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm married. I have a child. I've made my choice. You have no business here." Wade's face went purple. "The hell I don't. You're my daughter, and that baby's got my blood. I've got rights." "You sold your rights," Eliza was yelling now, all the rage she'd been holding back for months pouring out. "You put me on an auction block and took money from me like I was livestock. You don't get to claim concern now. You don't get to pretend you care." One of the hired guns was looking around, his hand near his weapon. "Where's Blackwood? He wouldn't leave his wife alone." "Maybe he got smart and ran," another suggested. "Knew he couldn't fight all of us." "Rowan doesn't run," Eliza said coldly. "And if you're smart, you'll be gone before he gets back." Caleb laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Eliza, be reasonable. We know the marriage was coerced. A man like Blackwood, holding you up here all winter, you couldn't have left even if you wanted to. We're offering you a way out. You and the baby can come to Denver with us, start fresh somewhere nobody knows the circumstances. I've even convinced Margaret's father to help financially. It's a good offer." "I don't want your offers." Eliza's hands were shaking on the rifle, but her voice stayed firm. "I want you to leave my property and never come back." "Your property?" Wade sneered. "You're a woman. You don't own property. Whatever's here belongs to your husband, and I aim to have a conversation with him about his treatment of my daughter." "Then have it," said a cold voice from the tree line. Everyone turned. Rowan stood at the edge of the clearing, his rifle in his hands, his face expressionless. But Eliza could see the fury in his eyes, the controlled violence in the way he held himself. He looked exactly like what the town had always said he was: dangerous, lethal, a man one step away from becoming a killer. "Blackwood." Sheriff Moody's voice shook slightly. "We don't want trouble. Just want to make sure Mrs. Blackwood is here of her own free will." She's already told you she is, multiple times. Rowan walked forward slowly, his rifle never wavering from the group. So the question is, why are you still here? Wade stepped forward, emboldened by numbers or liquor or both. I'm here because that's my grandson in there, and I've got a right to see him. Her, Rowan corrected. The baby's a girl, and you've got no rights to her whatsoever. You made sure of that when you sold her mother. That sale was illegal, Caleb interjected. Eliza was coerced, threatened. I was freed, Eliza called from the cabin, and she stepped out onto the porch, the rifle in her hands, hope visible in a sling tied across her chest. For the first time in my life, I was given choices. Rowan didn't coerce me into anything. He gave me a locked door with the key on my side. He gave me respect and safety and a home. Everything you never did, Father. Everything you promised and didn't deliver, Caleb. The sight of her standing there, armed and defiant with a baby against her chest, seemed to shake something loose in the group. One of the hired guns actually backed his horse up a step. Eliza, please, Caleb tried again, his voice taking on the pleading tone he'd used when she told him about the pregnancy. I made mistakes, I know that, but I want to make it right. Let me help you. Let me be a father to our child. Our child? Eliza's laugh was sharp and bitter. You denied her before she was even born. Called me a liar in front of the whole town. Destroyed my reputation to save yours. She's not your child, Caleb. She's mine and Rowan's. He's the one who brought her into the world when I was terrified and in pain. He's the one who walks the floor with her at night, who made her cradle and carves her toys, who looks at her like she's the most precious thing in creation. That's her father. You're just the man who provided the seed and then ran away. The words hit Caleb like physical blows. His face went white, then red, then settled into something ugly. You ungrateful. Careful, Rowan said quietly, and there was death in his voice. That's my wife you're speaking to. Choose your next words very carefully. The hired guns were looking at each other now, clearly reconsidering whatever they'd been paid to do here. Sheriff Moody had his hand on his gun, but looked like he desperately didn't want to use it. Wade, drunk and furious and losing what little control he had, made the worst decision of his life. His hand dropped to his pistol. Rowan's rifle came up in a smooth, practiced motion aimed directly at Wade's chest. Don't. Time seemed to stop. Wade's hand froze on his weapon. Nobody breathed. Then Hope, sensing the tension in her mother's body, began to cry. A thin, frightened wail that cut through the standoff like a knife. The sound did something to Wade. His face crumpled, some combination of shame and rage and loss that he couldn't process. His hand fell away from his gun. Damn you, he said hoarsely, but it wasn't clear who he was damning, Rowan, Eliza, himself. Damn all of this. We're leaving, Sheriff Moody said quickly, seeing an opening. Wade, Caleb, get on your horses. Now. This is over. It's not over, Wade slurred, but he was already being hauled toward his horse by one of the hired men. She's still my... She's not, Rowan interrupted, lowering his rifle slightly but not putting it away. She hasn't been yours since the day you sold her. And if you come back here again, if you make any more threats or claims or demands, I won't be this restrained. Do you understand me? Wade didn't answer, but Caleb did, his voice tight with controlled fury. You think you've won something here, Blackwood, but all you've got is a used woman and another man's bastard. That's not victory. That's consolation prize. Rowan took 3 steps forward before anyone could react, moving so fast he seemed to blur. He grabbed Caleb by the front of his expensive shirt and pulled him half off his horse, their faces inches apart. That woman, Rowan said in a voice that promised violence, survived things that would have broken you. She stood up to armed men and chose her own future when everyone said she had no choice. She brought a child into the world with nothing but grit and courage, and she's worth 100 of you. He shoved Caleb back toward his saddle. So ride away while you still can and pray I never see you near my family again. Caleb scrambled to right himself, his face pale with fear. The whole group was backing away now, the horses nervous, the men clearly done with whatever mission they'd thought they were on. Sheriff Moody was the last to mount. He looked at Rowan, then at Eliza on the porch, and something like respect crossed his face. I'll make sure they understand this is finished. File a report that says I witnessed Mrs. Blackwood here by free choice, armed and defending her home. should discourage any more legal complaints. Appreciated, Rowan said curtly. They left in a clatter of hooves and muttered curses. Wade slumped in his saddle, Caleb sitting rigid with humiliation, the hired guns looking relieved to be leaving. Rowan stood watching until they disappeared down the trail, his rifle still ready, his body still vibrating with controlled fury. Only when they were completely gone did he turn back to the cabin. Eliza had sunk down onto the porch steps, hope still crying against her chest, her whole body shaking with delayed fear. Rowan was beside her in seconds, pulling both of them into his arms, his hand cradling Hope's head through the sling. It's over now, I've got you. I was so scared, Eliza sobbed into his shoulder. I thought they were going to take both of us. Never, I'd die first. His arms tightened around them. You were so brave standing up to them like that. So damn brave. I meant every word. She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. You're her father, Rowan, not Caleb. You. In every way that matters. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, tasting salt and relief. And you're my wife, my family, the only thing in this world I'd kill for. He took a shaky breath. I almost did, when he reached for his gun. If you hadn't been there, if Hope hadn't cried, but she did, and you didn't have to. Eliza cupped his face in her free hand. You protected us without becoming the monster they always said you were. You stayed in control. Barely. His hand was trembling where it rested on Hope's back. For you, I stayed in control. For her. They went inside together, barring the door, checking the windows, settling back into the safety of their home. Hope calmed once the tension left her mother's body, nursing until she fell asleep, exhausted by the drama she was too young to understand. That night, after Hope was settled in her cradle and the cabin was secured, Rowan and Eliza lay together in bed, wrapped around each other like they were the only solid things in a shifting world. Do you think they'll really stay away? Eliza whispered. Yeah, I do. Rowan's hand moved slowly up and down her spine. Wade's pride is hurt, but he's also a coward. And Caleb saw what I was willing to do. They'll move on, find new targets for their bitterness. He paused. And if they don't, if they try again, we'll handle it. Together. Together, Eliza agreed and let sleep pull her under. The next morning brought news that traveled fast, even in the mountains. A trapper passing through on his way to Silver Creek stopped at the cabin with gossip that made both Rowan and Eliza stare. Wade Carter's dead, the trapper said bluntly, accepting the coffee Rowan offered. Horse threw him on the way back down the mountain yesterday. Broke his neck. They found him this morning, half frozen in a snowbank. Eliza felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a vast emptiness where her father should have been. What about the others? Harlan Boy lit out for Denver same day. Word is his engagement fell apart when his fiancée found out the truth about that baby. He's gone, probably won't come back. The trapper took a long drink. Figured you folks would want to know. After he left, Eliza stood at the window, looking out at the mountains that had become her fortress and her freedom. I should feel something, she said quietly. He was my father. He stopped being your father a long time ago. Rowan came to stand behind her, his arms around her waist. You're allowed to feel nothing. You're allowed to feel relieved. Whatever you feel is right. I feel free, she admitted. Is that terrible? No. He rested his chin on top of her head. That's honest. And honesty's the best thing we can give each other. Spring came fully in April, the snow melting into rushing streams, the meadows greening, wildflowers pushing up through the thawing ground. Hope was 4 months old now, laughing and cooing and beginning to reach for things with chubby, uncoordinated hands. She was a happy baby, secure in the knowledge that when she cried, someone would come. When she was hungry, she'd be fed. When she needed comfort, there were arms to hold her. Rowan built a larger garden, planning for the future, for feeding a growing child. Eliza sewed clothes that Hope would grow into, practical things in sturdy fabric, already imagining her daughter running through the meadows, climbing the rocks, growing strong and free. One warm evening in May, they sat on the porch together, Hope between them on a blanket, grabbing at her toes and making sounds of discovery. The sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "What do you think she'll be like?" Eliza asked, watching Hope with wonder. "When she's grown." "Strong," Rowan said immediately. "Like her mother, brave enough to choose her own path." "Smart," Eliza added. "We'll teach her to read, to figure, to think for herself." "Free," Rowan finished. "Free to be whoever she wants to be, love whoever she wants to love, build whatever life makes her happy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter discover her world. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't look like something to survive. It looked like something to build, something to hope for, something worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. "I was thinking," Eliza said eventually, "maybe next spring we could take some of your furniture down to Silver Creek. Sell it, like I suggested. Start making connections with other towns, other people. Not go back to how things were, but maybe build something new." Rowan considered this, his hand finding hers on the blanket. "You mean stop hiding up here?" "Not hiding, just living differently, living openly." She squeezed his hand. "You're not the man the town thinks you are, and I'm not the shameful woman they said I was. Maybe it's time we showed them who we really became." "Together?" he asked. "Always together," she confirmed. So they did. That summer, Rowan loaded a wagon with chairs and tables and small carved items. Not the fine furniture his father had made, but solid, honest work that reflected the life they'd built. They took Hope with them to Silver Creek, the three of them traveling together down the mountain for the first time as a family. The furniture sold quickly. People admired the craftsmanship, asked for custom orders, wanted to know when Rowan would bring more. Sarah Chen made a point of telling everyone that the Blackwoods were good people, that she'd witnessed their marriage and Hope's birth, that anyone who said different was dealing in old gossip and lies. By the time they returned to Pinegrave Ridge, Rowan had enough orders to keep him busy through the winter, and Eliza had made connections with women who wanted to trade preserves and fabric and the small luxuries that made mountain life bearable. The seasons turned. Hope grew, learning to sit up, then crawl, then pull herself standing by holding on to furniture her father had made. She took her first steps on a snowy December morning, lurching from Eliza's arms to Rowan's across 3 feet of cabin floor, both parents cheering like she'd climbed a mountain. By her first birthday, she was walking everywhere, chattering in sounds that almost made sense, investigating every corner of the cabin and yard with fearless curiosity. They celebrated with a cake Eliza baked and presents Rowan had carved, a whole Noah's Ark full of animals, each one smooth and perfect and made with love. "Make a wish, Hope," Eliza said, though the baby was too young to understand. But Rowan and Eliza made their own wishes, silent and fierce, for health and happiness and the continuation of this improbable life they'd built from nothing. The years that followed brought their own challenges: harsh winters, lean times, the ordinary struggles of raising a child on a mountain. But they also brought joy. Hope's second birthday, third, fourth, each one marking time in a life that felt increasingly impossible and miraculous. Trips to Silver Creek becoming regular events, the Blackwood family becoming known and respected, Rowan's furniture sought after, Eliza's preserves traded eagerly. They never went back to Gravel Hollow. There was nothing there for them anymore. Wade was buried in the town cemetery, and Caleb was somewhere in Colorado or California, chasing dreams that didn't include the daughter he'd denied. The general store had closed, sold for debts Wade had left behind. Hope grew into a child who looked like both her parents and neither, her mother's features, her father's serious eyes. A spirit entirely her own. She learned to read from Eliza, to work wood from Rowan, to navigate the mountains like she'd been born to them. When she asked about her grandfather, they told her the truth in terms she could understand. When she asked about Caleb, they told her he'd made mistakes and left, that Rowan was the only father she'd ever need. "But why did he leave?" she asked once, when she was 6 and starting to understand the complexity of the world. Eliza and Rowan exchanged glances across the dinner table. Finally, Rowan spoke. "Because he was scared. Because he thought his reputation mattered more than doing what was right. Because he didn't have the courage your mother had to choose love over fear." Hope considered this seriously, then nodded. "Then I'm glad he left, because if he'd stayed, you wouldn't be my papa." Rowan's eyes went bright with tears he didn't bother hiding. That's exactly right, little one. And I'd rather be your papa than anything else in the world. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Eliza and Rowan stood on the porch of their cabin, expanded now, with a proper bedroom for Hope and a workshop where Rowan spent his days creating beautiful things from wood and watched their daughter play in the meadow, chasing butterflies through the wildflowers. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked quietly. That day in town, paying all that money, taking on someone else's problems? Rowan pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. Every single day. She looked up at him, surprised, and saw the smile playing at his lips. I regret that it cost money, he continued. I regret that you had to suffer before you got here. I regret that I didn't find you sooner, that you had to endure Wade's cruelty and Caleb's cowardice alone. He turned her to face him fully, his hands on her shoulders. But I don't regret a single moment since you walked into this cabin. Not the fear, not the struggle, not the nights I couldn't sleep because I was terrified I'd fail you both. Because all of it led to this. He gestured to Hope in the meadow, to the cabin behind them, to the life they'd built through sheer determination and hard-won love. This is everything I never knew I wanted, everything I thought I'd lost the right to when I came back from the war. You gave that to me, Eliza, you and Hope. You gave me a reason to be better than what I was. Eliza kissed him then, deep and sure, tasting 5 years of partnership and struggle and joy. We gave it to each other, she said when they parted. That's what makes it real. We chose this. We choose it every day. Every day, he agreed and called out to Hope. Come on, little one, time for dinner. Hope came running, grass-stained and laughing, launching herself at Rowan's legs. He scooped her up easily, settling her on his hip like she weighed nothing, and together the three of them went inside to the home they'd made from desperation and hope, and the radical decision to believe they deserved happiness. Outside, the sun set over Pinegrove Ridge, painting the mountains in shades of gold. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, carrying the smell of bread baking and life being lived. Somewhere far away, Gravel Hollow continued without them, its gossip and cruelty and small-minded judgments irrelevant to the family who'd escaped it. And in the cabin, Eliza May Blackwood sat at the table her husband had built, watching him help their daughter wash her hands for dinner, and felt the weight of every choice that had led her here. The pain, the shame, the moment she'd stood on those saloon steps and thought her life was over, all of it had been necessary. All of it had been worth it. Because this warm cabin full of laughter and love, this man who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, this child who would grow up knowing she was wanted and cherished and free, this was the life she'd earned. Not through suffering, but through the courage to accept help when it was offered, to trust when trust seemed impossible, to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The woman they'd sold for $100 had bought herself a future worth more than any amount of gold. And the mountain man who everyone said was too broken to love had found the one person broken in exactly the right places to fit against his own cracks and make them both whole. They ate dinner together as the last light faded from the sky, Hope telling stories about the butterflies she'd chased, Rowan planning the furniture he'd build tomorrow, Eliza already thinking about the garden she'd plant in the spring. Just a family, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, living proof that sometimes the worst moments of your life are just the beginning of the best ones. And when they blew out the lamps and settled into bed that night, Rowan and Eliza wrapped around each other, Hope sleeping peacefully in the next room, the cabin on Pinegrove Ridge held everything that mattered. Not just shelter from the storm, but a home built on respect and trust, and the radical belief that broken people could choose to heal together. That was the story of how Eliza May Carter became Eliza Blackwood, and how a mountain man named Rowan found redemption in an act of desperate kindness. It was the story of Hope, who would grow up free and loved and strong. It was the story of a family that shouldn't have existed but did, built from pain and choice, and the simple truth that sometimes the person who saves you is the one who needs saving just as much. And it was a story that ended not with once upon a time, but with every single day after, each one a choice to keep building, keep loving, keep believing that they deserved the happiness they'd fought so hard to claim, the end and the beginning and everything that mattered in between.